Hi there, I'm Paul and welcome to another session on PowerApps. So in this video what I want to do is I want to talk about a workaround that will allow you to filter by dates when you're using SQL Server or Azure SQL DB as the backend for your PowerApp application. So this is going to get a little bit complicated because we're going to have to start using terms like delegation and to understand what delegation is and how that works and how it affects the way that our PowerApp applications are going to behave. So you can find out more about delegation on docs.microsoft.com, and the idea of delegation is passing the heavy lifting over to your data source, to your database backend, whatever it happens to be. Of course, PowerApps can use various different things as a backend. We're concentrating on SQL Server for today. Okay, so delegation then is when you are applying some kind of data manipulation. So you might say, only give me certain records, only give me the records where the order header ID is between 100 and 200, or in the case that we're going to have a look at shortly, only give me the order details that were placed today. So ideally you want, as I say, your database backend to take that request, work out the information that you want and just send you the matching records. If you have data manipulation in your PowerApp which is deemed to be non-delegable, then what's going to happen is your data source is going to have to send the data over to the PowerApp for the PowerApp to process. And that obviously is going to be slower because you're moving a lot more data backwards and forwards across the network potentially. And the other problem that you will hit is that when we start getting into the area of non-delegable formulas, you're only going to get the first 500 rows back. So you might have a filter which you would expect to return, say, 1,000 rows. But because that filter is not being applied directly in the data backend, PowerApps is pulling in the first 500 records, applying the filter to those 500, and then saying, job done. So you are not going to see all of the records that you were expecting. So let's show examples of this. So I've got a data source set up which is my order detail table in my Azure SQL database, and in that Azure SQL database, here we are, I have got at the moment 772 rows of data, and each row has got a time associated with it, and I've currently got 3 rows in there for order details that were placed today. So I want to try to find those 3 rows of data out of this set of 700 plus rows. Okay, so let's start messing around with some data manipulation here. So here's my gallery. Right now it's just linked directly to the order detail table, so we're not doing any data manipulation on there. This will actually return all of the rows from the table because what it does when we run it here is it will give us the first 100 rows, and then when we get to the end of the first 100 rows it will do a little refresh and we'll get another 100 rows, and it will do a refresh and we'll get another 100 rows, and so on and so on. So galleries bring in the data, it seems 100 rows at a time, and as you get to the bottom of the gallery, then the gallery will go and fetch the next 100 rows of data for you. Sometimes those 3 little dots show up to sort of give you a visual cue, I think, that there is more information that you can go and get. So if we keep scrolling down and down and down, eventually we'll get to the bottom of this table. Record number 932 is, I believe, the last record that we have in there. Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to start applying some data manipulations. So A typical one is filter. I'm going to filter the order detail ID is equal to, let's pick one of the numbers that we've got, equal to 300. And we can run that. And I should get just one record back, which is fine. Or I could say something like greater than or equal to 700. And let's run that, and now I should get a bunch of records back once it's refreshed. There we go. And again, it's going to do its refreshing to take me down the list. So what's happening here is that the filter is being applied directly in the database backend, and we can actually see that. So I've got, just clear this one out of the way, I've got an extended events running here, so I can have a little look at what select statements are being passed through to SQL Server. So I've had it running the past few minutes, so there's a lot of events showing there at the moment, but once we click in, we'll just scroll to the end and we'll see sort of what's happening a little bit behind the scenes. So I'd expect one of my select statements to be down near the end of the list here. Okay, here we are. Yeah, so here's one of my select statements. So it's saying select the first 100, because this has come from the gallery. Select the top 100 items out of my list here. And here's my where condition that I passed to it, where my order detail ID is greater than or equal to 700. And what the system has done here is it's put a windowing function here. So it's just counting the rows. This is just a counter to say this is row number 1, 2, 3, 4, up to whatever. And then down here it's put an extra where clause on to say, okay, we were only interested in the records where the order detail ID was greater than 700. Show us the ones that are the 101st to 200th matching item. So first of all, it's just pulling out the things that match the filter that we set, and then it's saying, okay, because you're looking at this in a gallery and you scroll down, give us the next match. Right. Okay. So let's jump back into our PowerApps. So that's fantastic until we get to what we actually want to do, which is to be filtering by the date. So let's see what happens when we do this. So my date column is order detail time, and it's the date of the time. So if I try and just filter for everything that is more than today, then surely that's going to be great, and it's going to give me my information. Okay, so here is the issue that we have hit. You can't do greater thans and less thans on dates currently in PowerApps with the SQL Server backend. It's not supported. So although, as we saw before, SQL Server is supporting filter and it would allow us to do the filter on the ID, there are certain data types that give it pause for concern. So it's warning us that this is not going to be delegated to SQL Server to figure out. What's going to happen is that PowerApps is going to pull in this order detail table, and then it's going to apply the filter itself. So it's going to pull this data down and apply the filter. So we should get our 3 records, right? No, we haven't got anything. Okay, so why is that? That's because when we pulling the information down and processing it locally, what PowerApps is just going to pull in the first 500 records from here and then apply its filter. So our records for today are outside the first 500. The first 500 records, if we go back to our list in SQL Server, if we have a look here, because these are pretty much all in date order, our first 500 records only take us up to the 31st of October. So it's looking for these 3 records, the ones that would match, the ones that were placed today, but it's only looking for them up to the first 500th item in the table, so nothing gets returned. So what can we do about it? Well, there's things that I think we can do. Okay, pull this information back, not in terms of the first 500, but the last 500. Then maybe we'll find the records we want by using our filter inside PowerApps rather than in the back end. So we're going to filter by the order detail ID. There we go. And we're going to specify that we want this to be in descending order. Great. So let's give this a little try and see if we have any more joy. Yay! So there we are. That has actually worked, and we've managed to get those records. And the reason that that has happened, as I say, is this time we're pulling the data from the record set. So we're actually taking the last 500 records and then looking at all those 500 records and figuring out which of them have an order detail time which is greater than today's date. Now, that's still not fantastic. I mean, it might be a workaround that will work for right now, and possibly for certain applications, depending on the sort of data you're pulling and the sort of filtering that you need to do. But if we wanted to be picking up details that were placed towards the beginning of our table rather than towards the end, then again we're still not going to find them. And we've got the performance hit of having to pull in 500 records and then figure out the ones that we want. In this case, there's only 3, rather than just pulling in the 3 that we were after. So this is kind of a half solution that you can make use of. So we want a better solution. How can we resolve this? Okay, well, we're going to have to put on our SQL Server hats for a moment and say, okay, because our order detail time can't participate in a delegable search for data filter, what can we do on the SQL Server side? Okay, well, what we can do is we can create a column which, instead of being a date column, is an integer column. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a calculated column which is going to give me an integer representation of the date. And let's see what that looks like. That's actually this column here. So this is 17 for 2017, 10 for October, 28 for 28th of October, 0732, 0732. Not worried about the seconds for this application. I've gone with a 2-digit representation of the year, because if we make this a 4-digit representation of the year, then we're going to fall outside of the limitations of what an integer type can hold. We'd need to use a big int instead, and PowerApps doesn't seem to understand big ints, so the easy solution is to take off the 20 in front. I know that's how we all ended up with the Millennium bug, but I don't need to be considering in this application any dates that are before 2000 or any dates that are after 2100, so it's not going to be a problem for this app. It's the next 83 years, so Okay, I don't think I'm going to be around or the app is going to be around in that time. But that's why I've gone for the representation there. Okay, so the way to set up is to simply I'm working from the right to the left as it's a little bit easier to understand, but we're saying, okay, give us the date part for the minute. So that's going to give us 20, and then we're going to add to that the hour part, which has been multiplied by 100, and then we're going to add to that the day part, which has been multiplied by 10,000. We're going to keep multiplying up so that you know, we can be sure that the last two digits are the minute, and the next two digits are the hour, and the next two digits are the day, and the next two digits are the month, and then the two digits which are the year. So that's how I am doing that. There are other ways that we can do it. So you may say, it's a bit of a faff. We could do this, for example, with the format command. Well, we could do it with the format command. You're absolutely right. But the format command is non-deterministic in SQL, which means we can't persist it as a permanent column that we can create indexes on. And as we're going to be doing perhaps a lot of filtering on this, it's going to help our performance if we can have it as a persisted column that can be indexed, so that we've got really great performance when we ask for things from a particular day. Then SQL Server can pull that straight out of the system without having to scan the entire table. Okay, with the amount of data I'm looking at the moment, with 700, 800 records, that may be a bit overkill, but let's try and design for the future, not more than 83 years in the future, but let's try and design for the future, and when we might have a lot more data in there, and we're a lot more concerned about how quickly we're pulling that data out. Okay, so back into my PowerApps again. What we can now do then is we can change our filter so that we're going to filter on the order detail time int column, that extra column that is being calculated and persisted for us. So to save me a little bit of typing, let's copy paste this formula in and see how we get on. So this time I am going to base my filter on the order detail time int column, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at today's date. I'm going to format date as year, month, day, hour, seconds to get it format as it is in our column, and I'm to a value. Now, something I've done on here is to also put a -20 in. So at the moment we're looking 20 days back, and I'll show you why that is in a second. It's because, once again, we've got this dreaded blue underline to say this isn't delegatable or delegable. So our issue here is that server and the manipulations that we're doing here. So when PowerApps is trying to pass this whole thing over for SQL Server to decode, SQL Server is saying, hang on a minute, I don't know what this text function is, and I don't know what this value function is. You know, what's going on? I can't deal with it. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send you the first 500 rows of data, and then I'm going to let you, PowerApps, figure it out. So I can see I've got at the moment, because if I set the date to 20 days ago, that information is in the first 500 records returned. But if I take this out and let it refresh, boom, there we go. I've got no records being returned. Let's just hide that formula bar for a second. I've got no records being returned because, as I have described, what's happening is we're only getting 5 records back, and then PowerApps do the necessary filters on that information to find the records that relate to today, and the records that relate to today are not in the first 500 records returned, so we're seeing nothing at all. Oh no! So what are we going to do about that then? Okay, so here we have to do another little trick. So if we can formula as a simple number that SQL Server will understand, and this formula will become delegable, and we'll be able to pull our information back very efficiently and not do all this pulling 500 rows at a time. So you may have spotted the little button that I've set up down here. So set variable for today. So what I'm doing here is it's the same formula as I was trying to use a moment ago in the source, the items property for my gallery. But what I'm doing is I am creating a variable which I'm calling my today time int. So when I hit this button, it's going to create this variable, and it's going to set the date of the variable or the value of the variable to be this integer interpretation of today's date. So let's hit the button. There we are, and just demonstrate what we've done there. So if I go into my variables, oh, okay, so the variables aren't going to, oh yeah, they, sorry, I'm going to have to run it and hit the button, the variable to be set. So now when I go into my variables list, here we are. Don't worry about these others, I've got some other screens on here where I've been messing around. This is the variable that we just created, and here we can see it's set to 2017, 11th month, 16th day, and we're not worried about the minutes and seconds. We want everything which comes after this is what we want to display at the moment. Okay, so now I've got a variable which has got my information in it. And I'm going to go to my gallery, and so now, rather than have a look at all of that, I'm going to paste in my variable, and I don't have any of these little blue warnings, and if I close this up and scroll up a bit, we'll see that we've managed to pull our data back from SQL Server, from Azure SQL DB. And much quicker, because we're just pulling back the 3 rows that match rather than 500 rows and trying to pick the 3 out that we want. So let's have a little look at our extended events again, so that we can prove that this is being processed on the server rather than being processed by PowerApps. Here we are. It's just going to take a second for it to render all of this in the XML. And so the last thing that we did, apologies, my machine is slowing down. Here we are. It's going to be this one here. Oops, scrolled slightly past it. So that is the SQL statement that it has run. So it's now been able to understand that value for the date that we passed through to. So this has returned 3 records, and they're the records which have been sent to the gallery. And if we just want proof of that, we can come into here and we could run that statement. So let's just comment out the top one, and we'll run this statement, and we should get back the 3 records that we were expecting to see. Oops. Sorry, my copying and pasting, I picked up a couple of characters I didn't need. So here we are. So here are the 3 records that we want, the ones from the 16th. So this is what's happening on the server. The request is being translated, if you like, by PowerApps into a standard SQL Server select statement, and then SQL Server can just process that and send the results straight back down to PowerApps. We've just got the records that we want to see. Great stuff. So that is how you can get your filters to work correctly, your date filters to work correctly in PowerApps. So you need to do a bit of work on both sides. On the SQL Server side, you've got to go ahead and you've got to create an extra column. So let's just bring ourselves back to that again. So you've got to create this column which is giving you an interpretation of your order detail time, which is as years, months, days, and hours and minutes if you need them. And if you recall, we did that by, let's try and find the right page again, by effectively multiplying each part of the date and time and then adding them together. And because we did it that way, we were able to make that a persisted calculated column, which means if you need the extra performance, you can create an index based on this column, so that the searches are very quick, even if you build up to the point where you've got millions of rows of data in there. And then on the PowerApps side, remember what we had to do was we had to create a variable, which again we're date, which put today's date into a similar format. And then what we did is in our filter is we had our integer column against our variable, which has been turned into an integer. So when PowerApps sees this, it reads the actual value which is held in that variable. It doesn't sort of work its way backwards through and say, okay, that's the variable name, so what's the formula that creates the variable? Well, it's this, and then tries to pass that through to SQL Server, because as we saw, passing this through to SQL Server will fail, or rather PowerApps doesn't know how to translate that into the SQL Server syntax, so it falls back on processing everything locally instead. Okay, so that's been a little bit involved, I think, because we've had to go in and talk a little bit about what delegation is and how delegation works, and how you can spot when delegation is happening, or at least sometimes you can, and a couple of ways of working around. So if you know that the data that you're looking for is always going to be in the last few rows, or the last 500 rows, then you could get away with our first little hack, which was to order things by in this case, the detail ID, but obviously you could order it by the date as well to make sure you're pulling out the latest. For this application, it would have worked because I only want to show today's information, today's information on here, and there will never be any future days for the particular setup I've got. Obviously, you can tweak things here so that you're looking for a particular date range if you want to, rather than just everything from midnight this morning onwards. Okay, so I'll leave it there. Please chime in on the comments if there's anything else you want to know about, if there's anything that's unclear. I may do another session on delegation soon, because I have discovered several ways of taking a formula and making it non-delegable, but writing it ever so slightly differently still makes it delegable. but the non-delegable version doesn't give you the blue warning lights. So be very careful with your formulas. As soon as your formulas and your data manipulation has any degree of complexity, then you want to do some tests, and you want to make sure that everything is being processed server-side rather than on the PowerApps client. Okay, I'll save that for a future session, and I'll wrap it up here for today. So I do hope that has been useful. I hope it hasn't been too complicated. It is a complicated thing to try to explain. Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you, and have a good day.